Hi. Hey everybody, how we all doing? Good, good, good. Good, good, good. We are going to be talking about React hooks. Come on in, find a seat. That's cool. I expect we'll have a lot of interruptions in the first few minutes, so don't feel bad. This is yeah, we're going to be talking about what React hooks are, using hooks, how to make hooks of your own, and how to do a bit of TDD if some of you guys are doing some testing, which I recommend, just generally speaking. So, hi, I am Joel Shinnis. I am a senior full stack developer at P&I Digital Media, and I am also, I have been a full-time.
Marie Kondo's audiobook.
Oh yeah. I have been. I was a full-time instructor at Lighthouse Labs for about 2 years, and now have been a. I'm a part-time instructor now. So, but I've been teaching web dev and teaching React. I wrote a lot of actually the React curriculum. React is my jam. Who here programs in React possibly for monies? Yeah. Who here has done something in React but wouldn't consider yourself a React developer, right? Who here put React in your resume and immediately felt bad about it? Is that anyone? All right. Who's never programmed anything in React before? Cool, cool, cool. This is actually kind of a cool time to start React because I think React hooks are amazing. So, yeah. So what are React hooks? What is React hooks? It's an API. I'm not sure exactly what we are and is, but what is a React hook? Yeah, this is actually just part of the evolution of React. And not really the evolution of React itself, but the evolution of how we define components in React. So React is a front-end framework. There were a lot of front-end frameworks leading up to it, from kind of the invention of jQuery and the start of the jQuery renaissance in like 2006, 2007. Eventually, people started wanting to make bigger things, and they wanted to have some sort of framework. They were always like, when you want to build something big, you're going to build your own framework if there's not a framework out there for you, right? So frameworks started showing up, and a lot of them, like Backbone, and who's heard of Backbone? Who's heard of Angular? Yeah. So who's done some Angular, right? So with that, those were MVC frameworks, Model View Controller, or MVVM, Model View View Model, or MVP, Model View. They weren't exactly sure what was supposed to come after MV, right? So we'd call them MV star frameworks, MV something something. And then React showed up, and it didn't have M's or C's. It was just a V, right? And it said, we're the V in your MVC. All it was like, hey, we're really good at taking some data and presenting it, and changing that and becoming like, it kind of works well. And then people started using React without other frameworks, and like, oh, okay, that's fine. So React was the start of this component first framework generation that has ended up including Vue and Polymer.js, right? So, but the way you define a component, the one thing you can make in React, has changed over time. So it started with React.createClass. You would say React.createClass. That's probably tiny. I apologize. You'll get the slides later. And you would pass in an object with these kind of like methods. These are like class methods, right? Because this is 2014. We didn't have classes in JavaScript yet. So, okay, so this is a class method. I'd have a get initial state. This is for a to-do app because everything's for a to-do app. So return to-dos, empty array, loading true. And you'd have this list presenter. And then maybe when it mounted, it'd have some other logic, right? Okay, so ES 2015 came out. We had ES6 classes. ES6, ES 2015, same thing, just in case you're wondering. Hey, buddy. We had ES6 classes, right? So we could finally write these as classes, which was kind of in a class form already. So this kind of made sense, right? So we would take that same logic, the get initial state. We could use the get initial state method, or we'd put it in a constructor, right? This dot state equals to do's. Here's our initial state. And then we'd have a render function, and maybe we'd have something in here that would do a set state to change that state, right? I think it was in version 16.6. I think it was like a year and a half or some change ago. We got function components. And function components were simple. Hey, we're going to put in some props, and we're going to get some presentation out. And this led to like, because if you make a lot of React components or React apps before this, you often had many components that were just a render function. Like that was it. They just had a render method. And so this sort of replaced that. If you didn't have any state management or stuff, this was good for that. The rule became, if it just takes data and presents it, use a function. For everything else, use a class. I have often advised my students that one of the smartest things you can do in job interviews is listen to things that are smart that then you can regurgitate yourself in future job interviews. And one of those things I heard back in, I want to say late 2015, early 2016 was, we really like React because your presentation is just a function of your data. And I was like, And in a later interview, yeah, I just like React because like your presentation, it's like a function of your data, right? You have some data and you just kind of present it. But like for all the other kinds of things you would have to do, that's where you would use a class. That all else could include state management, so keeping track of variables, DOM manipulation. Maybe you had to do something like grab a canvas and do things to it, or add event listeners to the document. You might want to do AJAX. You might have a WebSocket connection. You might have browser APIs you're playing with, like the navigator and that sort of thing. Basically anything that was any side effect or asynchrony. Who knows what I mean by side effect? Yeah, side effect, this is definitely like a functional programming concept. We have 2 seats over here if you want them. I promise not to pick on you other than just this moment. Good to see Abe. So, yeah. You're welcome. Forward. Yeah, IKEA furniture. I'm getting it done. All right. Also, one of those has points on it. Oh, no, it doesn't. Cool. So, yeah. So a side effect is, like if you're talking about functions as pure functions, they just take in an A and return a B. Like math.square root of 4 is 2, right? Math.square root of 4 is? Right. Same input, same output every single time. That's a function. If math.square root also had a function that like logged all the square roots that had been asked for, and you have a log of all possible square roots that had been asked for and what their output was, somewhere, some database of that is being updated, that would be a side effect. Side effect is making a change to a database. Side effect is changing a screen somewhere. A side effect is in a DOM. Basically, all of your business cards, if you're a programmer, should say, I make side effects. Because that is like the app actually doing something.
Besides only for one database, or can you cross?
Well, that's the thing, is that you may have, the question was like, do you get data from one place? Well, you may have data from all sorts of places. Like you may have something that looks at local storage to find a key that then it uses to connect to an authentication server, which gives you a token that you then connect to a socket with, right? So you may have something. So that's kind of the all else.
That's the meaning of the hook. For my learning, but the hook is that this special function hook into an VF function.
We'll talk about kind of the ones that we can use. I'm gonna. There's a bunch that do a lot of different things, so we're gonna get into that. So React hooks kind of are doing the everything else, and there are specific ones that do kind of specific parts of this.
Sorry.
No worries, no worries. So hooks they were introduced at React Conf in October 2018, and Reddit lost its damned mind. Everyone was like freaked out about them or super excited about them. Everyone was basically like, yay, magic, or that's too much magic. That's some dark magic, right? And by the way, just to let you know, for the scope of this, there is some dark magic that I poked into, and I was like, I don't want to know. So just understand there is some alchemy going on, and yeah, if you start seeing visions of crows gathering around your home, that's an unrelated matter. So So this is an opt-in feature that is available as of React 16.8. This was introduced when React was in 16.6, 16.7 beta and alphas had this. And then the blog came out for React 16.7 and it said, no, not the one with hooks. And then it was pushed to 16.8 alpha. 16.8 actually came out and the blog said, yes, the one with hooks. That was February 6th. I was very excited a few days later to find they actually existed. So opt-in feature available as of React 16.8. It uses mix-in-like behavior to supercharge function components. Community is still working on some of the kinks like testing and inspection. I'm going to show you how I test, but right now a lot of my inspection is still, hey, does it pass the right thing to props? So, all right, using hooks. So here's just a simple example of how this will look. We'll actually write some code in a moment. But here's a component that returns some JSX expression, right? And then I'll say at the top here, const product equals use some hook, right? So I might have something I get from it. I might have some other hook to which I pass a callback. It's a different stuff, but the main part is I have my declarations all at the top of my function. Now it's important that they're all at the top. And it's important that you don't have any declaration of your hooks, any stuff like this within a while loop or an if, because they kind of need to go at the top for the magic to happen. Okay. Ryan Florence talked about this at React Conf as well, and he said, "I love sometimes the best mnemonic aids for code are in the worst dad jokes." He said, "If you love React hooks, then you must love them unconditionally." As in, don't put them in a conditional block. Yeah, for some reason my slide wasn't working. I had like 4 GIFs of eye rolling after this that I couldn't put into the slides. I'm so sorry. So some common hooks are use state. So this is kind of like the list of like stuff you can use immediately. So use state is now going to be how we do state management. No more this dot state, no more set state, this right here. Use effect performs side effects or async actions. This is going to replace our component did mount, component did update, component will unmount. Use context connects to the React Context API. Who's heard of the React Context API? If you know what I'm talking about, this is what you will use. If you don't know what I'm talking about, don't worry about it. React Context is a lunch and learn for another day. And there's use ref, which provides a reference to a DOM element. Now, refs have been part of the React spec for a while, but this is where we can like say, okay, in here, I have this one DOM element. I'm going to add a ref, and then I can attach it. Like this is how I would do a canvas. I would say I would have a canvas ref that links to my canvas. I would make sure to put nothing on the canvas that was going to update, so just the same canvas all the time. And then when I got new stuff in, I'd be like canvas ref dot current dot get context, and then draw to it.
Can we use effect, the second function?
Use effect.
To change the use effect to change the web page in the React.
Yeah, so the web, I'll give a demonstration of this. It's okay that you're asking questions, by the way. Yeah, so what use effect will do is this is how we're going to do like an async call up front, or if we have to trigger some sort of side effect like listen to a document. I recently had a drop down, for instance, that I had to add an event listener to the document whenever this thing popped up, and I had to remove the event listener to clean up after myself, right? And the event listener in this case is like, hey, if I click on something that is outside of this ref, so I had a ref too. If I click on something else, then I want you to close this. I have lost focus. And then I had to make sure to clean that up. Otherwise, that's the #1 cause of memory leaks in JavaScript. So does have cleanup stuff like that. So use ref. And then use reducer. Who has done some Redux? Who likes Redux? A few hands go down. So if you are a fan of the reducer, and I'm a big fan of the reducer, I think it's super elegant and wonderfully testable. Like it's like you do all your state management, everything is just like input, therefore output. You know, that's a really easy thing to test. So then I know my stuff works. So you can use reducer. You can actually like be using reducers, which I think I love about reducers is that now to me, they are like they're a platform agnostic way of describing an application state. And again, this is an ode for another day. So, okay, so I'm going to present, but what I want to do is all right, so here's my incrementer function, or here's my incrementer app. I've been given this HTML CSS by my HTML CSS team. I have an HTML CSS team now. Actually, I'm working at a company big enough to have an HTML CSS team. It's kind of cool. That's another story entirely. So it has a button, and I'm going to find out how many times the button was clicked. Okay. So here's the code I have. I'm going to be using. Let me make sure that's no. I have the Babel standalone in here, so I'm going to be able to write JSX directly in this HTML page. It's a good way of demonstrating JSX. So if you're wondering, like, where's the Webpack, don't worry, there's not Webpack anywhere in this demonstration. So, okay, so what I want to do is I want to find that root, const root. Element by ID root. And I'm going to say here, I need a JSX expression, of course. Const JSX expression equals, we're just going to take all this stuff. Class name equals container, right? And then I'm going to React dom.render JSX expression root. Don't worry, the hooks haven't happened yet. I'm going to, who's ever heard of the container pattern, by the way? Okay, so a short explanation is that React doesn't have different components that do different things. It just has the component, right? It doesn't have the model view controller. So one way of separating those out is making components whose job is to do like the controller part. So I'm going to make something called a presenter, and it's just going to be a dumb functional component that takes in data, takes in some actions, and just presents them to the user. Okay. You may have seen me use the term presenter. That's what it means, that this is just a dumb presentational component. So function increment presenter. It's going to return this expression. Oh. Is that a good size of code? Do you want me to make it bigger? I can make it bigger. This can get bigger. Yeah. Woo! They're going to be able to see it in North Van. All right. So what I want to do is I want to pass some props here. And the props object is going to have a count. And is also going to have an increment function. All right. Does this syntax look a little squirrely to anyone? Like this is called object destructuring. So basically, I'm just getting a couple things out of that object. And this is going to have the count here. And this button on click is going to perform the increment action. All right. So that makes sense. This is going to say how big the count was. This is going to increment. My JSX expression is now increment presenter. I'm going to pass it a count of 4 and an increment function of, let's just say, alert. Hi. There it is. And this does say 4, right? It said 3 a moment ago. Okay. So this is just me setting up the magic trick. How would we keep track of this state in React before, on February 5th of this year? Well, we'd have to make a class component. So class increment container would extend React.component, right? We'd have to set up some initial state. So we need a constructor. That's not what I meant at all. The constructor does take in props. We should, maybe be careful that was there. And oh, by the way, this will not work if you don't write super props. Super props. And then, sorry, not sorry. All right. And then I can set up my initial state. All of this just to set up state because of object-oriented programming, or the version that we're willing to accept in JavaScript. So count 0. I'm going to need an increment function, right? An increment method, as it were. And this is going to say this dot set state count this dot count plus 1. So it's saying whatever. Oh, sorry, this dot state dot count. Yeah. So it's saying whatever the state count is. And you know what? Anytime I'm doing, I'm making a state update based on a previous state value, I can actually pass a callback here. So I am going to say that this is going to return an object based on the state that I come in with. I'm going to call this old state. Okay, so now this is, I know that this is going to be based on the most current information. All right. So then I can make my render function, and I can return increment presenter with count is going to be whatever the this.state.count is. And it has an increment action, which is going to be this.increment. I don't know if any of you are ahead of the joke already, but there's one coming up. So yeah, this should be fine. Oh, I didn't actually say increment present, so I'm going to say increment container. Right? So what should happen is that this should say the button was clicked 0 times. Hey, it works. Magic has occurred. Let's close that. I should be able to click this button, and it should increment the state, right? This isn't working. Can I read property that set state of undefined? I'm not sure if we have any Lighthouse Lab students here who can tell me what I failed to do. Failed to bind, or it doesn't have to be a Lighthouse student. That's fine. Yes. That's right. I failed to bind. This increment is sort of just freely associated. It's on the prototype of increment create container, but it doesn't know what this is when I called it. It thinks that this is the props object that was set because JavaScript is stupid. So what I have to do is I have to either say, I'm just going to say this.increment equals this.increment.bind this. I could also say increment equals, that's another way of doing that. But so now I have a version of the increment function bound specifically to this. It creates a new one, and it's it knows when I say this, it knows this, right? So there's increment container. And now, behold, it's increasing as it was meant to. Okay, so now we all go to sleep like it's Christmas morning. We wake up, and React 16.8 has come around. All right, so what do we do? Well, like I said, I'm not really going to use this class anymore. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a function called increment container. Doesn't have any props to speak of, so I can leave that out. And at the end, I am going to eventually return this JavaScript expression. I am going to use the use state hook here. And there's two parts to it. There is the state variable that I have, which in this case is count. And there is the method that changes that variable, which is going to be setCount. Use state, I'm going to put in the initial value, which was 0. Now you may notice here that this is an array. I'm not sure if this feels comfortable. Basically, use state returns an array with two objects in it. The first is the state variable, the second is a function. And so I am able to, like, again, destructure those out. Basically kind of unrolled them into these two things. So now I have count here, but this isn't an increment function, is it? This is a set count function. This is going to set count to whatever. So I need to make it increment. I'm going to make an increment function here. And I'm going to say that when this is called, I want to set count. And again, we're going to be able to take in a callback. Count is count plus 1. And now, and that's it. So let's see that live. Let's attempt to see that live. Use state is not defined. Sorry, that should be react.useState. Fair enough. And it does the exact same thing. With hooks, it is not, I don't think it's an exaggeration to say I may never need a class component again. Now, some of you may have skeptical looks. That just says, like, no, that can't be easy. He's got something else going on. And it's really not. Hooks are just sort of magic, and we should trust the wizards. I mean, that's sort of tongue-in-cheek, but also, like, use them a bit, get used to them, and you may find yourself getting more comfortable with writing like this. So let's take a look at those bits of code next to each other. Okay? So there's a few things to notice. For instance, I use the this keyword 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 times. I use the this keyword on this side not even once. And no one has ever said, oh, the this keyword in JavaScript totally saved my life today. No one has said that. It is always a nightmare. So I don't have that. And there's another thing to notice is that you also notice here I use the dot operator. I don't know if you know what that was called. That's a dot operator. I've used it 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 times. And over here, I've not used it once. Now, there's nothing wrong with the dot operator, but that is, when I say this dot state dot count, I am depending on this not being undefined and having something called state that is not undefined, which then has something called count, right? Like, that's a lot of trust. That is stacking a lot of boxes on top of each other, hoping they don't fall down. So I'm able to get rid of a lot of that. And then there's this. This stuff is just so that classes work in JavaScript, right? This is just some, like, JavaScript trying to market itself to OOP nonsense. It works, but it's also kind of superfluous and kind of hurts the reading of the code. You'll notice also this has 18 lines and this has 9. So this can make code more readable and maintainable. So here's an example of use state is, like, I basically put in the initial and I get what the current one is and what the and a changer for that. So use effect. This is another one to kind of understand. If I use it on its own, like, this is a good example of an initial Ajax call. Use effect, get to do's, then to do's, set loading false, set to do's, right? A lot of times when you're making a React app, you need to do that first initial AJAX call. Unless, of course, you're doing server-side rendering, which is, again, another lunch and learn. But we can also pass in something to use effect. We can pass in variables for it to pay attention to. So in this example, I am passing a page ID in. So imagine that we're like reading a book, but we're loading each page just as you go to the page. So this says, hey, when the page changes, I need you to actually set this to loading, go and get that page from my AJAX source, bring it back, and then put it in that page. Now, when I was doing this, who's used React Router or any client-side routing, right? There was always some sort of like, okay, now that we're on this, we have to go get that. And in React, when you had the classes, it was always some sort of component will update, component did update. They kept on changing, right? I could never remember what the current version of the updating cycle looked like. I don't have to now. This just says when that page changes. So this would be a great place for a route variable in your router, if there's some sort of route param. Hey, now that I have this, I'm going to go get this page and load it into here. Yeah. And then the other thing is, I said this would replace all your life cycles. Well, there's 3 parts of the life cycle. There's the mounting, which happens when it shows up onto the page. There is the updating, which may happen who knows how many times. And then there's the unmounting, the removal from the page. And you may have some cleanup. So if I return a function from this, use effect. So here's an example. Oh, that should say remove event listener. Let's pretend that says remove event listener, so that it gets stuck in your brains as the correct version. So here I added an event listener to do some stuff, right? But when I clean up, I remove it. So personal story here. I ended up, so I'm working on a side project, and it had a bunch of drop downs that were all different components, but they had the same drop down thing where if it dropped down, I should like close it when something else gets clicked on, right? And there was like 3 different components, 3 different like looks of components that had the same behavior. And I wasn't quite sure how to handle this. I ended up in my actual like day job having the same component with the same behavior. Someone had a jQuery implementation. I turned the jQuery implementation into a React class, but still very like class-like, right? I would like just to have this one behavior. Well, I brought this behavior into my other project as a hook. And then I was able to actually reuse this hook in 3 places. And I'll talk to you in a second about how we combine hooks. But then I was able just to have this behavior. So this is a really kind of powerful tool. Again, use ref, canvas ref equals use ref. I just sort of attach it here. Canvas, this canvas element is now being, I can actually interact with that DOM node directly. And then my use effect here is that when the point changes, I grab the context and then I do some drawing commands. I may clean up where the old point was. I may draw a new point. But I'm able now to actually attach specific things in the DOM. Okay, so those are some of your basic hooks. You can see more examples of them. But there's also really one of the cool things I've been seeing since October is that there's been libraries and libraries of hooks available. People are making more and more hooks. Well, how do you make a hook of your own? Well, good news is that hooks are composable. You know, you can take a couple of hooks, put them together as you see fit, and make a new hook of your own. You can use existing hooks to make new ones. So let's see an example of what that looks like. This was actually like, I've got a stupid smile because this is actually one of my favorite findings from this whole like putting together this lunch and learn. By the way, putting together lunch and learn is awesome because you get to learn like, you're like sitting there and being like, oh, that's a thing. Or is that a thing? Oh my goodness, that's a thing. Is that a thing? That's not a thing. It might be a thing. So let's go back to this example here. I have this incrementer, right? I have this logic of the count and the increment, and this is kind of how this starts. So what I can do now is say function use incrementer. And I may put in an initial value and just say it's going to be 0 if you don't put anything else. Then I'm going to take these two things, put it here, and out of this, I'm going to return an object of count and increment. So now, increment equals use incrementer 0. I'm going to make sure to save this. Back to this page. And now this entire state management rule set, the state management logic, is a hook of its own. Here's the syntax that made me the most excited out of all this. You guys ready for this? All right. Let's take these two lines. Actually, I don't think I can comment them out directly, so I'm just going to remove them. That's my entire container function. Use incrementer 0. Let's take a look at it. Let's take a look at this page just to make sure that you can see it's the same code. Use incrementer 0. I did a series of videos. By the way, I have a YouTube channel. I am Yes That Joel Shinnis on YouTube. Yeah, you guys still think it's funny. I've said it like 30 times now. I'm just like, this is a stupid fucking joke. What am I doing? So I'm glad someone can still find it funny. So I did a series of 3 videos that were taking the same app and making it using 3 different state management strategies. The first one was the container pattern, a class-built container pattern. And then I sort of made a container with hooks. And then I did Redux. And then I did another one with a new library called RX React. But it occurred to me that another state management exercise is to just make one hook that creates that. This is now totally divorced from presentation. This is totally divorced from like everything else. It's testable on its own. I can test kind of the parts of it, and it's just a function. So now this is another way of kind of looking at your apps, is that you can have this, and because we can combine them, we can have several different state management things that just manage one part and put them all together. We can have one thing that has many state management libraries that we have done for this, right? So you could have a high score state manager and a game. So like you have something that's like, I keep on using the same high score state management and the same game state management. I'm not sure how to combine those two. And this is where React Hook can do that. So there's one last thing I wanted to talk about. This is for all of you fans of test-driven development. Any fans of test-driven development? Yeah, fair enough. So the hard part about test-driven development is you keep on hearing, you should be doing test-driven development. And you're like, yeah, I know. And people say like, this is an important discipline. And like, I know. Don't you want to know that your code works? Yeah, that'd be nice. Aren't you tired of just debugging broken code? Yeah. I don't know what to do. Test-driven development is a skill in and of itself that needs as much practice as making the thing in the first place. So I'm going to show you how I do state management. For the presentation parts, by the way, I tend to use snapshot testing, which is just basically like, hey, if I put in this data, it should look like this. Yeah, that's about right. That's a bit fallible on its own. That's another talk for another day. Got lots of talks for other days, apparently. But I just wanted to show you how I test hooks. All right. Okay. All right. So I have made a test demo here. and I'm going to add a file, use incrementer.js, and also use incrementer.spec.js. Also, come to think of it, this should be a JSX. No, actually, this one doesn't have to be a JSX now I think about it. But my test will be a JSX. So one of the rules about hooks is that you have to use them in a function component. If you try to use them anywhere else, this thing will get mad at you, and it will hurt your feelings. So, so we have to create a component to test them. But that's not so bad, right? I'm going to show how that works. So I'm going to, let's get rid of that. I'm going to describe, use incrementer initial value. Here, close that. So what does this do? Well, ending. It takes the initial value and returns count as that val. That's one thing it does. And the second thing is it increments that. Okay, so now I have to be able to make a function here. Now I have to be yarn test dash dash watch all. My jest is doing a weird thing. I'll let you know. It's saying this thing is a problem that's not a problem, so just ignore this bit of readout. I don't know why it's doing that. But right now we have that in a skip. So how should I test this? Well, I'm going to say, I'm going to bring it in for starters. So const use incrementer, I'm sorry, import use incrementer from / use incrementer. Okay. I'm going to make a test component that's going to like do something with this. So function test component const count equals use incrementer, and I'm going to put 3 in there. And then I want to know what it was last called with. Well, first I have to return. Yeah, thanks so much for coming. I appreciate it. So I'm just going to return a fragment. Rather than kind of put this count out to the wrapper, I'm actually going to use I've been using jest mocks to just keep track of what it was last called with. And this has been pretty effective for me finding out what the last rendered value was. So I'm going to say const last count equals just fn. Keep track of props data. All right, so I have that use incrementer 3. I have last count. So this is going to like be on that. So now what I have to do is mount this using. I'm going to use Enzyme, which is a library for doing this. There's a React testing library that Kent C. Dodds recently made. It's also like perfect for this. But I am going to say mount test component. And what I want to know is that it passed, like, what I want to know is that it had this count value of 3. So I'm going to mount the test component, and I'm going to expect, I'm going to expect that the last count .to have been last called with 3. And it's going to say, well, mount is not defined. Oh, yeah, fair enough. Import mount enzyme. I should also like just import React from React. That's also going to be a thing. Test suite failed to run. Incrementer 2 is not a function. Well, they are correct. Ha ha ha. There is no function there. So I'm going to say export default use incrementer. Now it's a function. Oh, no, it's not. Function. There we are. Cool. Oh, it's saying that. Oh, what is it saying? Right. It's saying cannot read property count of undefined. That's true. It didn't return anything. So I'm just going to return count. Is initial value count is initial value. Cool. I love doing test-driven development. I love playing this little game against myself. It's called A-hole chess. And so you're playing two characters, one of whom is like the product owner who wants it to work properly, and the other one is the laziest developer in the world who wants to write as little code as humanly possible. So this is like, this should work up to this point. And you're like, yeah. And just like put as little expectation as little code, little expectation, little code. So this technically works, right? This is called with the right thing. But of course, yeah, that works. Okay, pending increments that count. So what I'm going to do is kind of the same thing. I got all this stuff. I'm going to make sure that a-hole programmer didn't hard code 3 into there. And then I have this last count. But instead of returning a React fragment, what I want to return is a button. Right? And its on click is going to be, well, I'm going to get increment out of here. And here we go, increment. So now I have this mount test component. I'm actually going to get access. Well, first I turn this from pending to it. Made that mistake when I was practicing this one. Where are all my tests failing? So I'm going to mount the test component. I'm going to expect last count dot to have been last called with 4. Right? Cool. I'm also going to put I'm going to keep track of this. Const wrapper equals mount. Expect last count to have been called with 4. I'm going to find that button. Wrapper.find button. Kind of, I can use a jQuery like selector syntax here. Wrap.find button. And I'm going to simulate a click event. So basically, I've made a test harness is just like push the button and the thing happens, right? And then I'm going to expect last count dot to have been last called with 5. That makes sense, right? So shock you. It was supposed to be called with 5, but it was called with 4. All right, I guess I got to actually do the thing. So I'm going to say const count set count equals, I got to grab import use state from React. Value function increment count plus 1. And my test pass. The only thing I haven't shown yet is that the only thing I should have another test for is to say, hey, when I put in nothing, please assume that the initial value is 0. But now I have a spec that says what this should be. And this is one way of testing hooks. I think they're going to kind of come up with better ones. This is the one that I found that was the best. That was, I don't know, it works, right? Okay, so, right. That's just thanks. Are there any questions? Any Q&A? Huh?
This will replace all forms of Redux.
No, this will replace class-based functions. Class-based components.
Redux is no longer.
Redux is okay. So here's the thing with Redux. The Redux is never part of React anyway. Redux was a choice that you made on top of it, right? It's kind of like when you have an Angular app and you decide we're going to do an Angular app. That's the end of the conversation. When you say you're going to do a React app, that's the start of a second conversation about like what your next thing is. So the stuff that you're seeing, yes, this could easily replace Redux. Redux is the right, in my opinion, Redux is the right tool given a certain level of complexity. And there's certain types of complexity, especially, that Redux is really well suited for. Specifically, like volatile complexity. That is to say, you have a bunch of messages coming in, and you need some really smart way of being like, I know which one to handle. And also, it does really well with like the wiggly, the sort of like, well, this is like this unless this happens. But if this has happened and this has already come in, then you don't want this second one. Actually, we want the first three. You know, that's a good place for Redux. So, and the reducer, because the reducer is a great way to test that logic. But actually, if you found like, I want reducers, but I don't want Redux, yeah, just use reducer. So this is another way of kind of describing your state management. I feel like I've made you more confused than less confused.
No.
So yeah, so Redux is certainly not discontinued. Redux is still a right tool for lots of things. But this is going to kind of like take a chunk out of some of the problems that I would solve with Redux were I to solve them with Redux. Including just the question of like, hey, I want to build a reducer for this because it's volatile, but it's still kind of small in scope. Yeah, I would probably just do a test-driven development of a reducer and then use reducer. Yep.
So earlier you were talking about use effect, and you said that it's kind of a replacement for component did mount and component did update.
And component will unmount, yeah.
And component will unmount. So is there any way using use effect to just use one of those lifecycle methods without using the other?
Yes. So if you, generally speaking, it's going to happen. Like if you pass in stuff based on like, hey, if you update this, do this. There's a lot of like update code where it's like, if this props dot, mouse count is not equal to next props dot mouse count, then do some stuff based on mouse count changing, right? And this is good for that. But if you don't want to do that, what I often do is I just set an empty array to use effect to say like, don't change based on anything, just do the component did mount stuff. And then you might even just have I say use effect, I have nothing, and I just return my cleanup. So yeah, yes. Yeah. So if I use it in a container pattern, what I would do is basically all of the containery stuff I would replace with, at the top, it would be like I would either use all my hooks there, like a few of them, or I'd use one custom hook that had all of that. And then it would just be like, here's all my props equals use to-do list app hook or whatever my special hook was. And then I would just pass all of that to a presenter. Yeah. No, I wouldn't use it in a presenter, unless there was some very specific presentational code, like because the presenter is all about interface, right? And a container is more about state management than it is about like the everything management. So if there's some DOM logic that the presenter, yeah. So a good example of that would be this dropdown thing, right? I don't need the whole system to know about the dropdown. I need this one little dropdown thing to know about, like attaching to the document and removing it. So this is a good example of like this sort of DOM management or browser API management is a good example of something that could belong in a presentational function. Yeah. Any other questions? All right. Thank you so much for your time and attention. I thrive on attention. And so please fill out your surveys that helps us make better lunch and learns. I will be putting out these slides and gists of my code for anybody who is interested in them. I've been recording this. My YouTube handle is yes, that Jolshinus. And I'll probably be cleaning this up a bit. You know, I don't know about bleeps, but just kind of clearing up the quality and probably like putting in a front thing and thing. So yeah, but thank you guys so much. I appreciate it.